Our first speaker is Dr. Katarina Popović. She is Secretary General of International Council for Adult Education, and she comes from Belgrade, Serbia, where she is a lecturer at home and abroad. She has been also invited she's been the member of International Adult and Continuing Education Hall of Fame. So she's been a teacher and a student, and that's why she is so convincing. Let's listen to her about civic education from the global perspective.
Dear colleagues, dear friends from Andragogical Center Slovenia and other colleagues, thank you very much for the invitation and for allowing me to join you today, although in this virtual and distant way, but still it's a pleasure to be with you. So the topic of your forum today is a very important one, and it became very important on the global level in the last few years. So I would like to share a few ideas, a few thoughts, and to comment a few tendencies in this field. I prepared a few slides to share with you, not too many, just to help you to follow my presentation, to my speech. And here it is. So I will be talking about civic education from a more global perspective. But when I say global, it means the perspective that influences us at the same time, and that will be also the main message of my presentation. So sometimes we talk about global citizenship as a new idea, but as a matter of fact, it's very old. I mean, there was some kind of idea of citizenship, as you know, in older times, then of course, ancient Greece. Then we talk very much about the birth of the human rights in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen during the French Revolution. And of course, today we have United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At the beginning, this understanding of citizenship was mostly about freedom, justice, and peace. But nowadays it's increased and includes social rights, political rights, human rights, and in the modern times, in the modern democracies, it's even broadened up and includes the topics that I will also talk about today. So let me first give a few comments and a view on what does it mean citizenship around the globe, because there are common things, but there are also things that have to be contextualized. So this is just a very short overview. And of course, there are more details, and I will be glad to share with you a text that International Council for Adult Education, my organization, prepared for the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning as a background paper for Confitea 7 that will be held next year in Morocco. And it's the main topic, or one of the main topics, will be citizenship. So we gave in this document a broader overview. Here just a few comments to see how much it does depend on the context. As we know, in Western Europe, when we talk about citizenship, it's mostly about political engagement, representative democracy, and the rights and the duty of the common people to take part in the decisions making. And it's mostly, or used to be, education for democratic citizenship as it was defined by the Council of Europe. In North America, the things are quite different. They talk more about sovereign political community and how people should actively participate in it. And of course, economic factors do play an important role in this participation. Africa is completely different. And when we talk about citizenship in Africa, we have to think about the colonial past, because citizenship is always a relationship between the state and the individual. And of course, what the state means, is it a national state or a colonial power? It plays a role. But what is worth of mentioning is African understanding of Ubuntu, which means like spirituality, relationship between the people, respecting the nature, respecting the people, respecting the others, and also a high respect for non-material order and spiritual values. Latin America is more about social aspects. It's about social movements, and citizenship is seen as a social and political power even a kind of a weapon in struggling for economic and social justice or against the exclusion, against the inequality. If you think of Paulo Freire, that would be the right direction to understand what is citizenship in Latin America. Asia is so diverse in every sense, in ethnic, religious, lingual way. And what we find, well, there are no many common things, but for example, religious tradition like Confucian tradition plays an important role. And it means there is a rule of virtue, and people should try to be virtuous and respect and do their duties. So it's not so much towards the authority, towards the country, the state, the government. And that's the reason, according to many authors, why we have a kind of soft authoritarianism in Asian countries. But there is a strong civil sector that tries to emancipate economically and socially, politically deprived groups. Arab region is, again, very, very diverse and very unstable. Diverse in both economic, political terms, and with plenty of conflicts. And of course, citizenship does express the diversity, the understanding of citizenship, and it's a kind of a mixture of national and religious identity. So sometimes citizenship is equal to the, obeying the religious rules, which is exactly the opposite of the understanding in Europe and so on. But what we can find common across the region is what we talk about is identity, especially if we talk about citizenship on an individual level. There is always some kind of patriotic or nationalistic or religious discourse, very mild to the extreme, on one hand, or on the other hand, and that's the tendency that we see getting stronger, hopefully, talking more about mankind, belonging to the mankind, and not only to a smaller community. It's about participation, it's about inclusion. So now, being more concrete, I would like to say what citizenship is not, or what it is not fully. So there are three understandings. They are quite common, but I think they are a bit wrong. First one is citizenship and civic education is a kind of partisan education. Partisan meaning belonging to the political parties. And of course, this could be true because basic knowledge about how political system functions, what is democracy, what about political parties, why they are needed, how they should work, that's very much needed. And who is not interested in that, the person not interested in that, according to ancient Greece and Aristotle, is a kind of idiot, meaning you could not be interested in politics, but politics will be always interested in you. That's the reason why it's necessary to be interested also in this kind of issues, but it's not the whole story. So civic education is much more than knowing about how political parties and this system functions. Second is something that used to be quite European, a kind of a fine and elegant European understanding. You go for voting once in 4 years and you take care about your local government, your city or village and your neighborhood, which is a very good starting point, of course, but that's by far not enough. And the third understanding that became especially strong in the region, Western Balkans and Southeastern Europe after the conflicts and the war in former Yugoslavia is, belonging to the strong civil society sector, being part of NGO or being part of the peace movement and similar movements, which is again very important. But nowadays, that's not the only understanding, and that's by far not enough. So what we see, or what we saw in the last, let's say 20 years, is a kind of paradigm shift. From this more traditional civic education, we moved to the active citizenship, then for education for democratic citizenship, quite European, because we took democracy for granted. So democracy is there, everything is fine. We just need to learn about it and we'll live otherwise in a good world. We just need to get some knowledge, to acquire some knowledge and skills for that. But today we talk more about global citizenship education. And that's what what I will advocate for in not only this speech, but what I also do as a Secretary General of International Council for Adult Education. What are the factors that made global citizenship education the most important topic today when we talk about citizenship? Well, I have listed here a few of them. The course of globalization, of course, and when we say globalization, we can immediately think of internet and social media, but of course we know that the globalization is a process that is lasting already for decades, getting faster and faster, including economy, culture. The world has become a global village, or a global market, or a global supermarket, if you want. And of course, the culture doesn't know boundaries. So the inevitable globalization with all good and bad sides. And then there were a few more or less recent events, like the big financial crisis, global financial crisis, which hit all the world. Started with the crisis of 2 or 3 American banks, but then all of us, especially in Europe, had suffered from the consequences. Then a few years ago, we had a wave of migrants and refugees in Europe. And that was a reminder, but that what's going on in other parts of the world does play an important role also for us, even if our countries are not involved in this kind of a conflict. Of course, climate change becoming the big topic of today, of any political, social, economic discussions, and the environmental degradation. Well, if there is anything that does not recognize the national boundaries, it's the climate. And of course, several ways of pandemic. Now we talk about most recent one, the COVID-19, but let me just remind you of the swine flu and the chicken flu and then Ebola. But we did not react really in the way that would help us to mitigate the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. So somehow pandemic was always something happening to the others, to some other country, to other continent, to other group of the people. So we were not really prepared. We were warned by previous pandemics, but not prepared for the COVID-19. And what we see also nowadays is the rise of authoritarianism, populism, extremism, xenophobia, violation of human rights, minority rights, freedom of speech, and so on. And again, so this is like the wave, and there is no country that could stand isolating and fighting this phenomena, being untouched by them, despite all of the efforts. And now I will try to give some examples to show why I deeply believe that this active and global citizenship is very much needed. So a few examples showing that we really do live in one world, in one village, or that we are in the same boat. First, let's check the relationship between citizenship, economic development, and democracy. And I decided to take a few phenomena, a few countries here to illustrate this. So the country, for example, like Venezuela, very rich in natural resources. Venezuela is one of the biggest exporters of the oil. It was really a petrostate, but indicating how the lack of democracy, the lack of democratic education, citizenship education, enable a group, an elite group, to take the country, in spite of the rich natural resources, to the economic and political and social chaos that Venezuela is in now, unfortunately. So it's simply not enough. So the participation of the citizens, the participation, of course, of the experts. So the broader groups of population need to discuss even the economic issues in order not to prevent that country depends too much, that country becomes too dependent on one source, as it's the oil in Venezuela. Or completely different example, but still showing us how this active and critical citizenship is important. The Asian tigers, the countries like South Korea and Singapore, where the countries that became economically really developed, industrialized and developed countries. And they are even praised for that. For example, Korea for their results in PISA and PIAC. But at the same time, there is a high price that they are paying for that, and for the education system that is focused on performances, on a testing, among others like PISA and PIAC. But the situation with the democracy and human rights is not a really good one, although there are not many news about that because of the economic successes of these countries. But they are not really, a model of a good democratic state with a very good, very high respect of the human rights. So economic development does depend on the education for active citizenship and, of course, global citizenship, which comes now when we talk about financial development. I mentioned the global financial crisis, but let's talk the example from our neighborhood. Let's talk the example of Greece. Now, you know about the Greek financial crisis, and you can wonder what does citizenship has to do with that? Well, quite a lot. When Greek government was taking the loans, high loans from the French and German banks, Greek citizens were not aware of the fact that it's not enough to go voting once in 4 years. So the government was not under the control of its citizens, and the government was taking the loans one after the other with a very high interest rate. And of course, the debts was enormous. And of course, citizens were not thinking of that. Well, every country is in debt, or most of the countries are in debt. So what? But there is a specific context, of course. And at the moment when the system broke, Greek citizens were confronted with the fact that the debt has to be paid. And of course, I will not go to the details, but I will just mention that nowadays, the ratio between Greek debts and GDP is more than 200%. So what kind of economic development and democracy is possible under the circumstances? So that's also showing and indicating how important this active and critical citizenship is in this case. Now, moving to the Switzerland, of course, rich country, are there any problems in the country famous for direct democracy? There are every here and there referendums, voting on a national level for different kinds of issues. But as I said, the world is global. And Switzerland is one of the biggest tax havens in the world. And of course, we all know about Swiss banks and the secrecy of the bank accounts, which might be fine for Switzerland, but not for many others. Let me say just there are countries in the Balkans trying to fight authoritarian regimes or dictators, if you want. And of course, as far as they know that their money is safe in the Swiss banks, well, we do not have many chances in fighting them or getting rid of them. So what is good for Swiss is not good for Europe or for the world. And in that sense, I would really like also Swiss citizens to be more critical of this policy of the Swiss government. And there are indeed some changes and indications that the Swiss government might change their bank policy. But well, we'll see. Very important, I mentioned climate change and environmental issues. And of course, this is the topic, a hot topic for all of us. And then in these environmental issues, we really see how global the world became. Now, first, I will start with Brazil, the country with the Amazon forest, of course, a few shared with a few other Latin American countries, but with the extreme deforestation. What has citizenship to do with that? Well, we know all how President Bolsonaro was elected as a president, not in a really democratic way. And one of the biggest failures or the biggest mistakes his government is doing towards its citizens is exactly allowing big companies to exploit Amazon woods and to destroy the forests. So deforestation in Brazil affects all of us. So what's going on in the politics is Brazil is the issue of all of us. And of course, also for Brazilian citizens, it's the responsibility not only towards their country, but for the whole world. And then now again, moving to another country like Norway, which is one of the richest countries in the world. And the country very famous for being aware of the threats by climate change and invitation to reduce the CO2 emissions and so on. They are trying to cut the use of the fossil fuels and to introduce electric cars and so on. But that's what they do in the country. But at the same time, they continue exporting gas and oil. Almost half of their exports is gas and oil. And even worse, they invite other countries to reduce the use of gas and oil and to reduce the exploration. At the same time, they have decided last year to continue exploring the gas and oil reserves in one of the most sensitive areas, Arctic Circle. So inviting the others to do it, but not doing for themselves. And now I also want to mention Serbia. We have a dramatic situation in Serbia with government that is allowing foreign companies to invest. I mean, they are, as a matter of fact, supporting them. These companies are not investing much, and they are destroying the environment in Serbia. Just today, and I will just jump to the last slide and they will be back. So you see a very fresh photo from the demonstrations that I took part today in many cities in Serbia and also at many spots in Belgrade. So the decision was to block the bridges for 2 hours to stop the traffic, to raise awareness of the people of the laws that allow foreign companies like Rio Tinto, the famous one, I mean, famous for the environmental degradation they cause, to stop a government allowing them to continue with the research and exploitation in Serbia. And of course, I mean, whatever environmental damages they do, well, for the whole region of Southeastern Europe, it's of importance because we are very close. So it's not only a concern of Serbian citizens, we have the responsibility for the others as well. And now I'm moving to the last two, like citizenship, conflicts, migrants. And of course, the issue that is very important for civic education and for adult education. What's going on in other parts of the world is affecting us. We saw it with the migrants wave. So where did they come from? From the countries where there are wars and conflicts, armed conflicts. So why are these wars happening? And now I took the example of Germany. There is a fact that many Germans are not aware of, that Germany in the last few years became the 5th biggest exporters of the weapon. Last year, they have allowed, I think it was 1.16 billion euros export to the countries that are heavily involved in the wars in Yemen. And it was Syria before that, Yemen, Libya, and so on. And of course, they export military and weapons to the countries like Emirates, like Qatar, like Turkey, and so on. So I would say this citizenship in Germany is not only about what's going on in Bavaria or any other of the German provinces, but it really has to do with the global responsibility for what the German government is doing when they are exporting governments. So when the migrants are coming to Germany, Sweden, Serbia, Croatia, or Slovenia, we shouldn't wonder. So this is one of the reasons. And of course, we had recent, in August, terrible scenes from Afghanistan. And of course, the last 20 years, there were facts that were ignored, that the world, especially USA, but also all other countries, among other also European countries, were heavily investing in military, well, services, stabilization, however they call it, in Afghanistan, but not much for the health or education or for the civil sector and so on. So we see the results now. And now we are worried about the Afghan citizens, especially women. We know what's going on. But as a matter of fact, we should have paid more attention in the last 20 years, asking our governments, why are you investing so much money, or what in exactly? And last point, and the last point also in my presentation, is about COVID-19 and the new normal. What this has to do with global citizenship? Well, very much. COVID-19, I said we are all in the same boat. Well, not really. We are in the same storm, but not in the same boat. Some people are on the yachts and some on the small boats. But the point that that is important for adult education, especially global citizenship education of adults, is what are the structural and systemic issues and problems that were really not solved in the time before COVID. that made the COVID crisis so bad. For example, the privatization and neoliberal approach to the health sector, political issues, and so on, that made government not prepared for the pandemic and so on. The recent Oxfam report showed that the number of the billionaires increased very much, and the rich people became even richer. Only one-off percentage or tax on those new billionaires would help to vaccinate the whole world, but this will not happen. And we will wonder and be worried about many people who are not vaccinated, who will come to Europe, or the other way around, never mind. But we will not tackle these systemic issues, and we will not try to change the system that enabled that some people become millionaires, while 200 million became extremely poor. So I think the task of a citizenship, global citizenship, is to address exactly these issues. Also the issues of the human rights. What's going on, and where is the line between democratic participation and the power the power of the state and government to act and to limit certain rights? There are many reports from many parts of the world that there is a decline in democracy and increased violence and human minority rights, women rights, and so on. So I think citizenship education needs to address these issues too. And finally, of course, we are so glad that we have digital technology and ICT so we can communicate, but at the same time, there is a push from global companies, especially technological companies in distance education, to shift all education to the online sphere. Well, we know that many things could be done, and part of education could be done over via Zoom and other platforms and so on, and through the digital tools and applications, but not all of it. So I would say, in shaping the new normal, we need to say, as citizens, as experts, and individuals and specific groups of people, we have to say, we have our say in shaping the new normal and critically reflecting the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, and then being active participants in shaping the new normal. I hope we will manage a new normal will not be a kind of technological dystopia, but a kind of a better world where the lessons learned from the previous part of our lives will be learned, and the world will be then improved. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm really sorry that I won't be able to be actively with you, but I hope I provided you a little bit of food of thought for your further discussion. My best wishes. Bye-bye.
V tem trenutku mi preostane, da se zahvalim Katarini za ta globalni pogled. Ja, vsi smo državljani sveta. Hkrati je nekakšen poziv, ki izhaja iz njene predstavitve in iz našega celotnega dneva danes, ta, da je potrebno, da smo ne le samo državljani, ampak da smo ljudje, da smo vsakodnevni človek, kar se da celosten človek z veliko začetnico. In to nekako sem razbrala iz Katarinega sprehoda po celotnem svetu, prikaza prepletenosti ozadja vsega, kar se dogaja, kar vpliva na slehernika od nas. Ampak Katarina je rekla, da je žal, da ne more biti z nami. Če pa ste prebrali v klepetalnici, se je ravno kar priključila. In zdravo, Katarina, ura pri tebi je 2 uri več kot pri nas. Hvala, ker si se lahko priključila iz Tanzanije.
Thank you for joining us from Tanzania. How is it in Tanzania?
Hello,
what are you doing?
It was a bit a surprise that it did work. Hello to everyone. And as you know, there are many international processes, very relevant processes for adult education now. And I'm part of these processes in African countries. And I can tell you, it's really a challenge for our understanding of global citizenship. And of course, it's a challenge in terms of having 35 degrees with high humidity. And currently, as far as I know, it's snowing in Europe. And adapting and working the circumstances like this, but also as adult educator, working in the context when citizenship means something completely different. In the context of countries that have been colonies for many decades,
that still suffer because of neocolonialism, that suffer because of the companies that are coming from our region, from Europe, from North America, and so on, and destroy the nature, destroy the environment, exploit the people, and so on. So critical citizenship plays a very important role here. And coming from Europe and being confronted with that, that's a real challenge for adult education. And still finding a common language and finding the common values that we believe in. And it was great to find out that in Tanzania, among adult educators, it was really possible. And these common values are really something that is valuable to fight for each of us at the global level and of course at the national level. So I'm here and I'm glad that I can join at least a little bit before I come back to my Tanzanian colleagues. And of course, I will be glad to answer some questions if there are.
Mm-hmm. Hvala lepa, Katarina, odlično. Obe se poznava četrt stoletja. We know each other for 25 years, something like that. And many things have changed. We both derive from a communist country. Actually, how was it for you to go on to become such a global citizen and teach others to be global citizens? What does it take? What is difficult for you? What is really, what are the things that inspire you? Could you say a few words?
You know, on one hand, this communist past was a burden because we did not have democratic tradition to rely on and to refer to. But on the other hand, in the process of changing and democratic changes, we have learned to be critical, and we learned also, you know, to view the political processes and the national global processes from the critical perspective. And I'm surprised sometimes to see that our colleagues in some of the European Union countries, in the highly developed countries with the long democratic traditions, they don't see this need so much. Like, oh, the society is everything is fine, it's good. And we learn to be skeptical. Well, maybe there is a bit paranoia in it, you know, but not trusting politicians. So being a critical citizen, somehow our communist past helped us to overcome that and then to become really continuously critical. So I'm sharing it with my colleagues in Europe, but also in other continents at the global level, it's very, very welcome. And people are really very open for that, and they are very aware of this fact that it's much needed. So with the countries who go through the decolonialization process, we find a lot of commonalities. For us who are, you know, who have communism behind us and looking for a new democracy and creating a new democracy, there are many commonalities around the globe. So as a matter of fact, it did help quite a lot.
Perfect. We will let you go and continue to work with your colleagues in Tanzania, and all the best to you and to them as well. Good luck with establishing democracy there as well, establishing a new order, a new world. Thank you for being with us, Katarina.
Thank you, and best wishes for the rest of the forum. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.